the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing here at the University of Lancaster. And this evening we are very, very pleased to be sharing with you a conversation then between Mia Kankimäki and Dr Elina Mikkilä. Mia is the author of 2 books of hybrid narrative nonfiction, if we can find a phrase for what she does. The second book, The Women I Think About at Night, has been translated into 19 languages, including English. And the book depicts Mia's travels across no less than 3 continents in the footsteps of historical women travellers who inspired her to leave the comforts of the 21st century. Prior to becoming a celebrated author, Mia worked as a publishing editor for more than a decade. And lastly, but no means leastly, she has a master's degree in literary studies from the University of Helsinki. So she's going to be talking with my colleague Elina, Dr Elina Mikkilä, who is a Marie Curie Fellow in Creative Critical Writing here at the department. Elina is working on an auto-fictional monograph that explores, works on and around various writers from all over the world who, in Elina's word, have managed to merge creative and critical discourse in a way that exceeds the sum of those 2 parts. And they will also be joined early on in the conversation by another colleague of mine, Dr. Sara Wasson, who will be a reader at some point early on. I hand over now.
Yes, so actually, thank you so much for the introduction, John. And I would then ask Sara to read the passage from Mia's book.
The privilege to read these words. So this is the opening chapter of The Women I Think About at Night. 1. Night Women, a confession. I'm M. I'm 43 years old, and on countless nights over the years I've thought about women, and it has nothing at all to do with sex. I've thought about women on those sleepless nights when my life, my love, or my attitude is skewed, and it seems there is no end to the dark night of my soul. On those nights I have gathered an invisible honor guard of historical women, guardian angels to lead the way. The lives of these inspiring night women have not followed traditional paths. They have transgressed boundaries and expectations. Many of them are artists and writers, people doing lonely and introverted work. Most have not had families or children, and their relationships with men have been unconventional. Many have travelled in or moved to foreign countries and made massive life changes at an advanced age. Some have lived with their mothers their entire lives. Some have suffered from diseases and mental disorders, but all of them have followed their passions and made their own choices. These exemplary women have been my plan B, the one I'll adopt if everything else goes to hell. One of the women is Sei Shonagon, a writer and court lady who lived 1,000 years ago in Kyoto, about whom I wrote my first book. But there are many others. Some nights I lie awake thinking about Frida Kahlo, whose biography I read when I was 18. It transformed how I thought about womanhood. Other nights I think about Georgia O'Keeffe, who wound up alone in the New Mexico desert, painting buffalo skulls and making her first trip around the world when she was in her 70s. I think about Yayoi Kusama, a Japanese woman who, deciding to become an artist, wrote to Georgia O'Keeffe to ask her advice, and later, after shaking up the New York art world in the 60s, returned to Tokyo and asked to be allowed to live in a psychiatric hospital. I think of Karen Blixen, who followed her husband to Africa and ended up running a farm on her own. I think of Jane Austen, who, though she lived unmarried in her parents' attic in the English countryside, transformed the art of the novel. I think of the poet-artist Emma Saiko, who lived in Japan in the Edo period. It is her calm that finally brings sleep to the dark night of my soul. And I wonder where these women found their courage. What advice would they give me if we could meet? And above all, could I go exploring in their footsteps? I've been on that journey for some time now. And the amazing thing is that I keep finding more and more forgotten night women who churn up my imagination, an ever-expanding network of women who lived in different centuries and different corners of the world, slicing the waves through my brain. They are Marys, Karens, Idas, Nellies, Marthas, Alexines, Sophonisbas, Batistas. They are writers, artists, explorers, depressed spinsters, war correspondents, wives of Renaissance aristocrats. They are the women I think about at night. At first, I thought about them on sleepless nights in search of strength, inspiration, and purpose for my life. Now nights, I stay up specially to think about them, my pulse pounding for them and with them. Why have they come to me, clung to me, swept me up in their lives? Why have I surrounded my desk with their faces? Why do books about them pile ever higher on my floor? Why do I collect facts about them like talismans? Let me start at the beginning, one picture at a time. But first, let me pack my bag. I have a flight leaving soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a beautiful interpretation. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you. An honor to be.
Yes. And can I ask you, Mia, to also to read a little bit from the same passage, maybe 3 paragraphs or so, in Finnish, so that people get to hear the language a little bit. Thank you.
Quick course in Finnish.
Mm-hmm.
Yönaiset tunnustus. Minä olen M, olen 43-vuotias. Olen vuosien varrella lukemattomina öinä ajatellut naisia, eikä se liity mitenkään seksiin. Olen ajatellut naisia niinä unettomina öinä, kun elämä, miesasiat ja asenne ovat tolaltaan ja tuntuu, ettei se kauhea sudenhetki pääty ikinä. Noina öinä olen kerännyt itselleni näkymätöntä historiallisten naisten henkivartiokaartia, suojeluspyhimyksiä, jotka johdattavat eteenpäin. Näiden inspiroivien naisten elämä ei ole kulkenut perinteistä reittiä. He ovat rikkoneet rajoja ja tehneet asioita, joita heiltä ei ole odotettu. Monet heistä ovat taiteilijoita ja kirjailijoita, niitä joiden työ on yksinäistä ja sisäänpäin kääntynyttä. Useimmilla ei ole ollut perhettä tai lapsia, ja heidän miessuhteensa ovat olleet epäsovinnaisia. Monet ovat matkustelleet tai muuttaneet uuteen kulttuuriin ja tehneet suuria elämänmuutoksia vielä kypsällä iällä. Jotkut ovat asuneet koko ikänsä äitinsä kanssa. Monet ovat kärsineet sairauksista ja mielenterveysongelmista, mutta kaikki ovat seuranneet intohimoaan ja tehneet omia valintojaan aikansa odotuksista piittaamatta. Nämä esikuvalliset naiset olisivat minun suunnitelmani B. Se, jonka ottaisin käyttöön, jos kaikki muu menisi pieleen.
Okay, kiitos. Thank you, Mia, and thank you also for accepting my invitation. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So,
inviting me, it's an honor to be here.
Yes, and also welcome everybody, and thank you for tuning in. You can pose questions during the whole discussion and just write them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end then. And I had actually planned 3 parts for this talk. I want to talk about the creative writing process with you, and also the research part of the creation process, and about marketing. And actually, like intuitively, I wanted to start with the creative writing process. I think it's something that speaks the most to me, but at the same time, I just realized when I wanted to do that, that it's certainly the other way around. Actually, you do the research and then you write afterwards. Would you confirm this, or was it more like a mutually enriching process where both parts were in this type of circular interaction with each other?
Yes, I think they are very much intertwined. And it's sometimes even hard to separate them. My books are partly my own travel diary and partly biography of historical women, and partly maybe something else. And especially with the travel diary, I think it's very hard to separate the research and the creative writing. It sometimes happens simultaneously. But of course, generally, it's true that I first do a lot of research and gather material, like I like to think. And this means sitting in a library and reading about these women and reading their books and letters, and then traveling to the places where they have been, or maybe not in this order. It can be other way around also. And then when I have all this material, then I start to really build up the manuscript. But I think it's really intertwined all the time.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting also, because when I was drafting these questions or themes that I wanted to talk about with you, it was the same. Like, it was very difficult to draw a clear line between both of these. And so in your book, you have narrative elements and you have this biographical research, and you combine the two. And here, I'm saying here at Lancaster, we have this intertwining also, which we call creative critical writing. And this is a point where I wanted to come back to your university studies, because you studied, like we heard, general literature. And I happen to know that your master's thesis was about the classification and reading, different types of classification and reading in autobiographical literature. And in this thesis, you identified some hybrids between fiction and nonfiction. And I was curious if you can just mention some of those forms, like what would that be?
They were maybe not clearly hybrids, but some kind of borderline case. Or it's actually a little bit difficult to talk about this, because the vocabulary is a bit different in Finnish. The big distinction in Finnish is not fiction and non-fiction, but rather, if I translate word by word, is like beautiful literature and fact book. So it feels a bit different, and I was studying borderline cases of literature and fact book. And my questions were something like this, like, can, for example, an authentic diary be considered as literature if it's well written and intended to be read as literature? And also the question of who decides whether a book is literature, and how this affects the reader's expectations and reading experience, and also what kind of role the publisher might have in this, how they package the book and how they categorize the book, and how this affects the reader. Does she consider it as a work of art or as an authentic diary if she reads a book like that.
Yeah, I think that we'll probably get to that also at the end when we're talking more about marketing. The interesting thing for me is that this master's thesis was written in the end of the 90s, right? And your first book came out like 15 years later, and still it was this big question: how will it be published, as fiction or as nonfiction? And what I see here is like the clash between different notions of literature. You have a big gap separating the academic system like from the publishing world. And it reminds me of the online literature, like about the same time, end of the 90s, and the alleged end of the printed book. Like people at that time, enthusiasts, be it like academics or people involved in this scene, writing themselves, they were sure that the printed book was going to die. And we see like all this time later, it's still here. So, but what I wanted to know from you is where do you position yourself? Is it like this academic ivory tower or l'art pour l'art? Or is it more like pragmatic considerations that you also think that this book has to be sellable somehow? Or do you think maybe that you've managed to bridge the gap?
I have really distanced myself from the academic world. That's because I worked such a long time in the publishing world. But I also feel that the worlds of research and writing and publishing are really totally different planets almost. And for example, if I think about the genre of my book, I think it's a good example. Because when I wrote my first book, I definitely didn't have any theory in mind, or I didn't even know what the genre was. I knew it was, I was writing mainly nonfiction, but I also tried to write it in a literary, ambitious way. Yeah. The book was about my journey to Kyoto in the footsteps of Sei Shonagon, who was a writer who lived 1,000 years ago. And I was mixing my travel diary and research, and there were also lists and poems and all kinds of material. And when I was writing it, at some point I was thinking, should I think about the genre of this book? But then I decided that I will not think about it, but I will just write whatever that felt fun and inspiring at the moment, and really try to play with all these different elements and styles of writing. But when the manuscript was ready and I sent it to the publishing house, I first sent it to the literature department, because I thought I have tried to write literature. Yes. And they called me and said that, listen, this is all very nice, but you write quite well, but what is it? And I had to say, I don't know. I think it's a book. But they didn't know what it was, and then they decided to send it to the nonfiction department. And they said that, okay, there is this new genre we heard of. It's called the narrative nonfiction, and maybe this could be a little bit like that. Okay. And of course, then later narrative nonfiction became a really popular genre in Finland also.
Yeah.
But it feels that you really need to define the thing until you can call it a book. And, even if I had that I had studied the field, I was really shocked how important this genre suddenly was, and how there was a big gap between, or it was really important how the book was classified and how many things, how many practical things it affected, which department at the publishing house, and where the book will be in a bookshop, and which grants you can apply, and even the writers' unions are strictly separated for fiction and non-fiction in Finland.
Okay. Yeah.
So you really have to choose your genre, and and this is something I had to deal with my second book too. But I really like to mix genres, and I would like to just write a book, but I think it's not possible.
Yeah, that reminds me actually of a funny incident, because I went to get your book like just before Midsummer, and I actually went to the, like you said, the beautiful literature at first, and then I just realized actually I didn't find your book, and so I thought about maybe it's not where it's supposed to be, and then we went on searching for it, and found it where they keep memoirs and autobiographies, and biographies, I think.
Yes.
So
I think it's classified as social studies or gender studies, which sounds very scary to me, but yeah.
Where is that?
In US.
Okay.
So the English version, yes.
Well, that's very interesting also, that you have different classifications for different countries. Yeah. But I have to admit that actually when you talked about narrative nonfiction, it kind of rang a bell, but because I just came to the UK from the German-speaking world, I hadn't heard all too much about it either. And I think I must have heard of it like in the American context, but that's all. But yeah, in your book you have a couple of techniques, like literary techniques that you use to combine both worlds. And for example, there's a leitmotif you oftentimes in the first third of the book, which is about Karen Blixen and your travels in Africa. There's this phrase, this introductory phrase, Karen writes. And later this phrase disappears. And at some point it came unclear to me if it was you or the Italian artist that was actually asking for funding. And I have to, I listened to your book. If I had read the written version, I think that there might have been like italics or something that I would have recognized who it was from. But I didn't even want to find out because I think that this blurring, it was so interesting because it shows, and in today's fiction, you're talking a lot about show, don't tell. And this really shows how close you got to the women, that the reader doesn't know anymore who's talking, actually. I don't know if that was intentional, but this was the feeling that I had, like listening to it. And also I identify with this intoxicating feeling of getting lost in research, and especially in research which is very close to your own passions. You just want to find out more. And I think also that it's very characteristic of infatuation. One just gets lost in this feeling. But it's not very practical when you then start writing, is it? So I was thinking, how did you overcome this research overload? Because you comment on it in your book and also in the paratexts.
Yes, so. It's indeed very difficult. It's with this, when I was writing about these historical women, I noticed that there are really hundreds or thousands of interesting women, so it was really difficult to even choose them. But I think the key is a good editor, and also I have a colleague and friend who reads and comments my texts, because I really can't see anymore if I have a lot of material, what's important and what's not. And sometimes I somehow blame myself why that I do too much research, and why can't I do just the right amount of research. But I also think it's maybe the only way to really get inside the material. And it's also important to know more than what's in the book. I think, I think Hemingway actually once said, I'm not a follower of Hemingway in my writing, but I think he once said that in the text you only see the tip of the iceberg, but the reader will notice if the iceberg underneath the surface is missing. So I think you need to have a lot of information underneath, so that you can write in a relaxed way,
Yeah, I actually thought about a couple of things. I thought about this female conscientiousness, where you kind of think you have to know everything before you can actually say something or write something. But I've also heard that a lot of authors have the same problem, that it's actually the editor who then helps to get this like cut down. But yeah, if I see this from the outside, I might say, why didn't you make a trilogy of this book? You could have, published a book every 2 years, and
it would have been wise in a way, but I never really thought it. I really wanted to have this book where there's really an overload of night women, and to express the fact that there are so many interesting women in so many different eras and different in different parts of the world. And also, I don't know how the idea would have worked as a trilogy. Can I be searching for night women in 3 times? I don't know. Somehow the narrative would have been quite difficult, I think.
Yes.
Maybe I was so stupid.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It would have been like well, 3 is a very mythological, or also used a lot in narration. So maybe just a series of 3 books more than a trilogy. But yes, I get your point that somehow I think it also conveys exactly that, what your feelings were at that point, and your travels. So I'll just step down from the editor post. Because also I think that you have a very kind of very stern way, in a way, saying that I actually want to study women that I'm interested in, and I see this position in a way being auto-theoretical, and so because your research is based on identification, and you said that you want to get to certain places, and so you chose these women also based on that. So I think that's also a very empowering, is maybe a better word to use, that you just claim what you want to have, and you seem to have had it. So congratulations on that. We are approaching now the creative writing process part of this discussion, and like I said, your own exploration in this book kind of mirrors the explorers' journeys, the female explorers' journeys, and in some ways it's different, and in some ways it's comparable. And when I was listening to your book, I thought that your narration was a kind of metatext 2.0, because you have a very chatty and at times also self-ironic way of engaging with these women. And you're in dialogue with them as if they were like women of the 21st century, right? And I was very curious about how this style came about.
I think the point for me in my projects has been that I really want to compare my own experiences with the experiences of these historical women. For example, how it has been for a woman to travel or write or make art in different times and different cultures, and what I can learn from these women. And one of the important methods has been to actually travel to the places of these women. In this second book, I went, for example, to Tanzania and Kenya in the footsteps of Karen Blixen, and in my first book, I went to Japan, tracing Sei Shonagon, and by going to these places, I have somehow tried to bring our worlds together and to understand their lives better through my own experience, even my bodily or physical experience. But how this style came about, I think I have to talk a little bit about my first book, because it started already there. In my first book, I went to Kyoto in the footsteps of Sei Shonagon, and the idea for the book came from the fact that I had read the pillow book of Sei Shonagon at the university, which is written 1,000 years ago, and I really loved it, and I was really amazed how modern it was, and how it really felt that some things in a woman's life haven't changed at all, and it felt at some points that it could have been written today, and I really wanted to explore what can a Finnish woman living in the 21st century have common with this Japanese court lady who lived in this very strange culture in Heian time Japan 1,000 years ago. So I wanted to go and compare our experiences and do many of the same things that she had done, to sleep on the floor and write poems in the moonlight, or dress myself in that 12-layer court kimono of Heian time, and also to in writing to imitate the lists she writes. And I really want to create a dialogue between us. But when I started to write about all these different things and different kinds of texts, I found it was very hard to combine them, the biography or the Heian time history and politics, with my own travel diary. The style was just too different. They were very stiff and theoretical and distant. So I actually started to write to Sei Shonagon in second person, like I was talking to her, and I was I wrote all these difficult parts in second person, like I was telling them to her, and suddenly it happened that we were in the same world, and I could talk about all my things with every aspect of her life.
Yeah.
So the distance somehow disappeared, and of course I wanted to continue this in my second book too. So I have written letters to these night women, and this chatty style you mentioned. It's like I'm talking to them, and I think it reduces the distance between us and brings our worlds together. So it's a kind of method.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. Yeah.
And one more thing, it actually it really invokes ideas about how our world and experiences are linked, and it helps to see the similarities and differences how was it for a woman in 400 years ago, or how it is in my life.
Yes, and you've actually succeeded in that like really well, because for me it's fascinating. I've always been more interested in the present moment. So, but in this book, you have also advice for us from that time, like from different time periods. And I actually have an example here from Night Woman number 8, who is Lavinia Fontana. And as her profession, you state she's an artist's daughter. She's a later wife, a mother, and a career woman. And she supported her large family by painting, and branded herself the favorite artist of noble women, and earned like a man. And now we come to the advice that you give at the end of the chapter. And you say, if you want a glorious career, make it. If you plan to give birth to 11 kids while doing so, find yourself a man who's up to it. Follow your night women, brand yourself, paint yourself the way you'd like to be. Bond with women, but earn like a man. Be industrious as hell. Work out of passion. And if you suffer horrific losses, keep going. And I find that very cheeky, this advice. But yeah, somehow you feel very close to these women, and it's just wonderful how that was phrased. But regarding the last point, where you say if everything goes wrong, you just have to keep on going. On your journeys, be it concrete or in writing, have you had any signs that have encouraged you in your own direction? And yeah, I was, for example, thinking about this Italian female art exhibition that took place, I think, a year or some years after you had already discovered these female artists who were like, you didn't even get to see their paintings because they were behind closed doors. So I think that in a way, for example, this is a sign saying that where you're going is relevant to others.
Yeah, about that sign, I think I realized also writing this book that these historical women and women artists of history were coming a big theme, and there were really signs everywhere. So I really was rushing to write the book, so that before there are like 100 books like that. But otherwise, I think there's no other way than to follow your convictions. And also, I think these night women's stories prove it. It's all about following your thing. You can't. I think you can't do anything else.
But has it been hard or easy for you to do just that?
Of course, it's hard. But I mean, the starting point. It's just that I have to think what interests me. What do I want to do? Where do I want to travel? What do I want to know about? And then I just start to follow that, even if it sounds very strange. I think these book projects have sounded very strange even to me in the beginning, but somehow there's no other choice. And of course it's difficult sometimes, and you don't know if you can pull it off. But for me, when I'm started, I can't stop anymore somehow.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something, because what you say about innovation is actually bringing together worlds that nobody has seen together before. And for example, here, so you put the women's history together with the style that's actually common to advice literature. So
I actually didn't think that at all when I was writing. It's only later that someone said it to me, and I was like, oh yes.
Okay. How did you see it yourself?
I don't know. I didn't think at all.
Okay.
I don't know. It was just the whole project was about finding advice for my life. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of logical to put those or that advice at the end, actually, for yourself as well, as an encouragement, I think. I guess.
Yes, especially for myself. They are all for myself.
Okay. Okay. Well, we won't tell that to anybody, so everybody can read it for themselves as advice. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, when I was reading your book, I was at times, moved to tears. At other times, I was laughing. And then I started thinking about how this emotional reaction actually comes about. How can research and nonfiction become so moving? And I came to the conclusion that it was about identification. And now I'm an artistic researcher in the field of literary writing, and I was the first to do this in the German-speaking world. So a bit naively, maybe, but I identified with the trials of these pioneering women somehow. But at the same time, your book speaks to a lot of different people. And I was thinking that I've experienced something similar with Jonathan Franzen's novels about the family. Of course, he's a megastar, but still, I had my identification was based on factual similarities. But I met a lot of people where that wasn't the case, and still the book reached these people as well. And I think that you offer a lot of various figures of identification. But I was interested actually in finding out the women who spoke to you. Which traits did you identify with in these women?
Well, the whole starting point for the project was that I wanted to find some historical role models for myself. So I really chose those ones I felt I had the strongest connection with. So it was all about identification. Of course, I chose writers and artists and travelers because I could identify myself with those roles in general, and I could compare our experiences in those fields. But there were also much more personal traits I was looking for. For example, I could find quite many women travelers of the 19th century, many interesting women, but I didn't choose those rich, young, noble women who traveled with a large entourage. But rather I chose these middle-aged spinsters who didn't have much money, but who suffered from headaches and insomnia and frustration, and before they started to travel alone. For example, Isabella Bird was like this. She started to travel in her 40s out of doctor's orders to cure her many illnesses, and ended up traveling around the world for the next 30 years and writing 10 travel books and so on. Maybe one other thing was that was also actually mentioned in the reading in the beginning. That I chose quite many of these women didn't marry or didn't have any children, and this was a very important point of identification for me. As a 40-something single woman, I was really interested in how can I live a meaningful life if I don't build up a family. Very personal things, and also many of these women made big life changes in their 40s, maybe even later. For for example, Karen Blixen started to write only in her 40s, and that was something I could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in the case of the Renaissance painters, I could identify with their problems in artistic work,
Okay.
fighting with deadlines and marketing and getting money and so on. The normal life for a freelancer 400 years ago. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really always looking for something I could identify with.
Yeah, and I actually found one more point. It's a metatextual one, because I think that you talk about this humorous Mary Kingsley, and I think that your text is very humorous at times as well. So I kind of found this point of identification there as well. But I guess you could say that I is many, like there are so many facets to one's personality that you can find different examples.
Yeah.
But you've still said that your writing style has been very intuitive. There have not been that many conscious models, role models, and I was still thinking about the unconscious development. I tried to push this a little bit in the beginning when we were talking about the similarities, like between your studies and what you later started to write about, or the style of writing. But if, like you say, there were almost no literary models, how have you developed as an author? Have there been like key experiences or turning points that have deepened your creative work? These kinds of crises that, as you said before, also are inherent to every artistic process. Have they profited your maturing process as a writer? Is there something you can, maybe it was in the beginning also when you started to decided to start a totally new life?
Actually, I can think of one literary model, the Seisonagon's Pillow Book. Of course, it's a kind of genre hybrid itself, and it contains like diary-like parts and essay-like parts and lists. That's what I wanted to imitate in my own book too. But otherwise, I think the big leap for me was in the very beginning, when I realized that if I would like to write a book, it wouldn't have to be a novel. I somehow had thought that writing a book means writing a novel, and I thought that I will never have that imagination to do that. So, but I suddenly realized that it could be something else too. It could be something documentary. And I think I maybe got inspiration for this from some TV documentary series and some art exhibitions also. There was this one TV documentary called Confessions of a Free Woman, and I think it was Jennifer Fox who was making it, and she was interviewing women around the world, and at the same time she tried to make some personal decisions about her own life. And this was quite new at that time, to me at least, and I realized it's possible to tell an interesting story by documenting your project and your own life. This was before the reality TV, I think.
Okay.
And
sounds very interesting. I would like to see that too.
Yeah. And then the other big thing was there was an art exhibition of a Finnish artist called Marita Liulia. It was called Choosing My Religion, and she had traveled around the world doing research about different religions, and she had taken photos of herself in a role of a practitioner of those religions, and I think that gave me the idea to try to do things that say Shonagon had done, and dress myself in that layered kimono and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think this really gave me idea how to use my own experiences as a material for an artistic or documentary work.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because you mentioned embodiment before, and of course embodiment is really like the trend in artistic research as well. But at the same time, I think that there's exactly this point that some of these essential steps actually, or jumps or gaps, or however you want to call them, they occur actually in phases of writing without writing. That you're not so conscious that this is for your writing or this creative work, but you just kind of evolve or develop as a human being, right? And while you were talking, I was thinking about Riikka Pelo, who is also a Finnish writer who got the Finlandia Prize a couple of years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. And she described actually her creation process that when she managed to find or finish her book, at the same time she also managed to perform the last asana, like a yoga position in her routine that she had been trying to do for a long time. So this is also an example for embodiment, right? That there's so much more to it to develop, especially in autobiographical writing. Yeah. But because I think that in this sense, all of this is an expedition, right? And it's funny because now I was talking about Riikka Pelo, and actually in Finnish it would be tutkimusmatka, right? Expedition. It's a research trip. And now you go on these trips and you do research, so expedition there. But at the same time, I am really curious about, because I'm traveling quite a lot myself at this moment, how consequent are you in taking notes? Or is it sometimes the traveler, Mia, who takes over and just wants to enjoy the moment? And if so, can you kind of retrieve the atmosphere of something if you didn't note it at the time? Is it possible to recall that moment?
If I'm traveling for a book, then it's super important for me to write the journal and notes every day, every evening.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm on a trip, for example, on a safari, there's so much information and impressions coming to you 24 hours. If you don't write it down immediately, after some days you will not remember at all what happened the day before.
Yeah.
It's really exhausting to do the writing all the time or every evening, and it takes a lot of time, but I will just have to do it because otherwise I will lose all my material. Of course I can also remember things later, but I think I don't know, somehow I think it happens that I only remember those things I have written down. Later when I read, like after many years, I almost feel that if I didn't write it down, it didn't happen. It somehow the writing down also makes it real. Many times I understand what's happening only when I write it down.
Mm-hmm. But like you said, it would be like an exercise each day, like more like diary writing, because I've never been much of a diary writer, and now it makes sense to me that you actually do it the whole time, even though there's nothing that out of the ordinary, maybe, but maybe later on it's going to be relevant, right? Have you seen that there's been a development in the course of time? Like, have you learned to discern relevant observations better? And are you more confident about leaving other stuff out?
It's hard to say, because this writing the diary every evening, it's almost like automatic typing.
Yeah.
I don't think at all. I just write down everything that comes to my mind. So it's not really a rational process of choosing things, or maybe I choose unconsciously. Hard to say.
Yeah, but you then have a lot of material that you don't actually need, or
Yes, of course. Of course, one book can only have so much material, so I really edit and rewrite and
yeah,
a lot. Yes, of course.
yeah. I would maybe say about myself that I note, like I write down something that seems noteworthy to me. So it's a little bit different from writing a diary, but that's very, very enlightening to me, because something that I haven't thought about of doing. So maybe I'll delve into this during my travels. But yes, you also said that it's actually in the moment where you start writing and rewriting, like you've already done the research, you've already, you have your diary, travel diary, that you start to understand what this book is about. And yeah, this is very characteristic of the creative process, because the text kind of starts to live a life of its own, right? And kind of falls into place during the writing. I wanted to know how much do you structure your narrative? Do you prefer to leave it open so that you stay fascinated yourself about what you're writing?
Do I structure my narrative beforehand? I would say I don't at all.
Okay.
Actually, because when I start with a book project, I have no idea where it will lead and what will happen and what I will find. It's literally an expedition, and I don't know what the result will be.
Mm-hmm.
For example, with this book, I only knew that I would start by going to Tanzania and write about Karen Blixen, and after that I literally started to go through books in the library to find some other interesting women. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the structure and the story comes with the journey, and only bit by bit I start to realize what kind of material I have and what are the questions, and
Yeah.
it all really comes with the writing process.
That's also very courageous, I would say, because it could just, you can get very lost in doing this. So, but at the same time, I think that you have this thrill of exploring and writing. So, kind of two sides to the same story.
Yeah, and yeah, sometimes I also think that I mean, real life and research are so chaotic that it's sometimes you really have to make the story in the material, and I have to think if I should create a story. Maybe there is no story.
Mm-hmm.
Life is chaotic. The research doesn't come to you in a very structured way. I remember with my first book, my editor really wanted me to build a story in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I think he even drew me the curve of this Hollywood movie, or maybe the Aristotelian structure of a play, and beginning and middle and end. And I remember I protested because life is not like that. And but maybe we managed to find a compromise, and there is some sort of plot or a story, but there's also room for the randomness of life. And I think this has also to do with the authenticity. How much can you build a story, and when does it become fictional? I don't know.
Yeah, well, when you were talking about this plot, I totally agree, because I think that today there has been so many studies about memory and memories, and all this neuroscience also about this topic, and I think that everybody knows now that it's a very unreliable friend, your own memory. But at the same time, of course, we're trying to put all of this in a nice linear narration. But all of that was then again fragmented in the postmodern times. So once again, two sides to the same story. But I don't know, I maybe interrupted you. You wanted to say something? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I was thinking also that maybe this is my point of view. I think that when you kind of become true to yourself, right, and you find your own voice, so to say, this is of course a cliche, but at the same time it's very difficult to attain, like in real life. And we were talking about this before, but I think that there's a big parallel, because you had a pioneering role in narrative nonfiction in Finland, and this is kind of similar to the Night Women in their respective fields. But if we're moving on to the last side, like you still have another side to you, which is the part that you've been a marketing editor and a publishing editor for many years. And so this is the last part of our talk, is about marketing. And at some point you wrote to me that you're now totally brainwashed by marketing. And does this part of yourself intervene actually with the author in yourself while you're writing, in the writing process itself?
I've been thinking this a lot, actually. I worked for 10 years as a marketing editor, writing advertising and trying to sell books by writing. And I sometimes think that maybe I still do that, even if I basically write for myself and write about things I want to know more about. And my books are, of course, very personal. But I definitely also want to write in a way that people really want to read. I want to write for a large audience. And in a way, this means that I'm somehow trying to sell my text to the reader. I want that the reader wants to read it.
Consciously during the process of writing?
No, I don't think about it like that. But and it sounds a little bit bad, but it doesn't. I think it doesn't mean that the text should be very easy or shallow or just entertaining or something like that. But it's more like I'm so enthusiastic about these things. For example, about these Night Women, and I really want to share it with readers. So I really try to put it in a way that the reader wants to buy it. I don't need money, but to read it. So it's somehow, I don't know if I think about it consciously, but it's like
well, it really comes across, I think, exactly that feeling. I wanted to talk about a funny thing, because in your book also you talk about a photo session where you were obliged to wear high heels, and your clothes were picked by a stylist, and you found this to be somewhat ridiculous and unauthentic. I tried to find that photo online, but I couldn't find it.
Not online. I have the magazine at home, but
okay, maybe you'll show it to me at some point. But yeah, I know also from the German-speaking world that earlier you used to have these little photos in their publishing catalogs of the authors, and now these are like whole-page portraits. And it's very important that the author is also presentable, and you could all even talk about a visual turn. So what's your experience with this type of marketing, and what have you been forced to do, or how have you been preserved? Perceived.
I find it quite distressing that the author should be presentable and in such a big role. You have to be on social media, you have to do a lot of marketing yourself, do many interviews, and for an introvert like me, it's difficult. It takes a lot of energy, and so I think the focus has somehow shifted from the book to the author. Also, when my first book was published 9 years ago, there were several reviews of the book in different newspapers. But when my second book was published, there was only one newspaper review, but instead many interviews from me. So it's really the author's story seems to be more important than the book itself. So somehow I understand the mechanism, but it's somehow sad.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of something I experienced in Austria years ago. This was also like a lot of older women. They were women writers. They were upset by this development and this shift of attention, right? And but at the same time, I also remember one author sending her fictional figure to the prize ceremony, which was a very open kind of creative engagement with this change, right? And and I also think that it coincides with the subject of your book and what you have been doing, like discovering yourself at a later age. So I think that also this frustration by that was uttered by the Austrian writers, female writers. It just shows how much pressure there is to, earn your living by writing. And so there's one point that I still wanted to get to is about the financial aspect also. There's a huge list, or a pretty long list, of funding bodies at the end of your book. How easy has it been for you to find funding?
Well, there's a long list. But I wrote the book for 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's not easy to survive as a writer in Finland. The market is small, and it's very rare that you can live out of selling books.
Yeah.
But somehow I've managed to survive for 10 years now. So so I've been lucky to get some funding. I wouldn't say it's easy to get a funding, but it's possible to get some once in a while, and then in the meantime I sometimes almost move to my parents' house.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not always easy, but I've survived.
Yeah, do you still have to do other activities as well? Like, is it something writing related, or?
Actually, no, I have been full-time writer for 10 years, which is a great surprise to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because even you mentioned Finland, and I know that even Germany, like some bestseller writers can't actually live out of their writing. But then again, in the German-speaking world, you really have a lot of readings, and writers gain their livelihood by doing these readings. But at the same time, it also occupies a big space, of course, in your year if you go on a tour. So but I found yet another meta level within the literary field, because now your night women, they're going on trips all over the world in all these translated versions. And I actually saw a Facebook posting that kind of revealed to me that I think you're a fan of the haptic book. And the covers of these translations, they are so beautiful. And because the advertisement that I made for this event has like a collage of all of these book covers. Did you how do you see them? Can you kind of retrieve what the idea is behind these different linguistic cultural contexts by looking at the book cover?
Sometimes maybe, but not always. But I have to say, to see these different covers, it's one of the best things in this translation thing. Of course, it's very nice to work with the translators too, but to see these covers, it's always a big surprise. Sometimes it's well, for example, when I first saw the Japanese cover of my first book, it was almost a shock. I couldn't believe it, because it was a manga drawing.
Okay.
And the book is all about Heian time aesthetics and this woman who lived 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But of course, then I realized the logic and understood it was the best possible approach for the Japanese market. So, and it's one of my favorite covers now. But it's also, I really, of course, they sent me the covers to see, but I never want to. I really don't want to comment, because the book market is so different in different countries that I really have to trust. They know best what's good for them.
Yeah, and that actually also coincides with what you said about your book being classified in the States as sociology or something like this. So yeah. Pardon me?
Social studies and gender studies.
Okay, yeah. And but maybe to end this talk, I would still want to know about the feedback that you've received, because now you're inspiring a lot of other women. And do you get like messages through your website or comments at readings, or do you have any anecdotes or nice memories?
I get a lot of feedback from Finland and abroad, and I think quite often readers write about how the books have resonated with their own lives, and they tell me a story of their lives, and how they feel that they were empowered by these night women, and how they got some strength to do some new things in their lives. So that makes me, of course, very happy. It's really touching to realize that all over the world there are women and men too who share the same feelings and same experiences, and that it's possible to reach them even through a translated book, which
Yeah, I think that must be amazing. Like, does it feed into your next writing process? Does it enrich, or does it encourage you in this exploration also as a courageous woman?
Yeah, yes, of course. I'm not going. My next book is not going to be about historical women, but maybe the one after I will come back to this subject. I think there are so many stories of historical women that need to be told, and maybe there are many people who need to hear them too.
Super. Okay. I've seen there are a couple of questions, and maybe John, do you want to take over for that? Are you aware that that's your job?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we've got sorry, we've got a question here from Kat. I'm seeing there's one other. Yes. Okay. So first off, Liz, do you want to add anything to your question in the chat bar?
No, I'd just love to know more. You mentioned translators, and I'm sure there's not a short answer to this. I'd just love to know more about your work with translators. You could just pick one, but I'm fascinated by that huge topic. Is it an easy relationship? Let's start with that question.
It's very interesting. Often I don't meet the translators, but we work through email, and so it has been super interesting to see what kind of questions they ask, and also, of course, no one reads the book in such a detailed way than a translator. Even not the editor reads the book on that level, because they really need to understand every word, and sometimes it also makes me see how I have thought that I have written in a very clear way, but then I realized that many things can be understood in many different ways. And of course, I can't read these translations, or only maybe English and Germany and Swedish also. So it makes me understand that the translations are, in a way, they are the same book, but in a way, they also are a different book.
Absolutely, it's fascinating. Thank you. I'm going to look at your translations some more, and the covers and everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Liz. Kat, you had a sort of related question. Do you want to add to what you've written at all? Oh, she's typing. Yeah, I think you've got a problem with the mic, perhaps. Okay, so I think Kat's going to tell us she's got a problem with her mic. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, I don't know if you can see in the chat bar there, Mia, Kat's wondering if you're working with a female translator, ? Then is that interesting or significant in terms of crowding the house, as it were, the literary house, with yet another woman, as it were, that you're writing about a woman and you're writing, in a sense, through another woman if the translator is female. I think that's the gist of the question, I think.
That's difficult to say. I've had both men and women translators. For example, this English one is translated by Doug Robinson, and with him we really worked a lot together. I read and commented, and we exchanged emails for many months. It was so much fun, but it was also very interesting to see how he sometimes he told me that maybe at the page of 70 or 100 he started to be me. He's about 68-year-old man, and he started to transform.
At about page 68, yeah. Page 68,
so it was really nice.
Yeah.
But sometimes we had some discussions about He said that, well, it was interesting to talk about some womanly things with him. Yeah.
Thank you. Liz has mentioned she knows his theoretical work.
Oh, yeah.
I have a question, but I'll wait and see if was anybody else though want to come in, just turning their camera on, mic on, or whatever, or writing in the bar. Yeah, please, Sarah.
I wanted to ask quickly about ghosts, if that's okay. And there's this marvelous passage where you're talking about the need to try and finish the book and how hard that is. And you say that you have to stuff the night women in the desk drawer because this book has to be finished somehow, but the drawer won't hold them. Their voices leak out of it like a fog, clinging to my clothes, being carried into my body on my breath, being absorbed into my tissues. And I sleep in their presence. My notebooks are heavy with them. I mean, it's just magnificent description of this very vivid material presence of the mostly dead. And I'm just wondering about that, the way that, you know, as the writing process progresses, there's that move that's so moving, I think, from them being idealized heroes in some ways, you know, the bravery of Karen Blixen, which is so true, but then that vulnerability and fragility of those voices, and also the kind of burden they end up placing on you in the most benevolent way, you know, but there's still also a kind of ambiguity of bearing those voices. And so I just wanted to ask about that, really, about a kind of, it felt a bit like a kind of productive haunting when I read that, a kind of useful haunting. But it must be hard as a writer to kind of be in that suspended state where you've got all those voices pulling at you and seeping into your clothes and body. And I just wanted to ask you about that process, really.
Yeah, you're right. It starts to get very heavy. I think for the last year and a half, for the last year, I was writing like 7 days a week and full days, and living with these voices, and it was really rough. I think when the book was published, I think it took me almost a year to recover from all this. So it's a tough process, yeah.
What's tough about it? Do you want to sort of say more? Sort of half guess, but do you want to expand on that at all?
How can I say? This whole book and all characters are constantly going on in your head day and night, and if you're working with a deadline for 1 year, you don't do anything else. So it's a little bit like going crazy. And I think also one of my editor friends said that if you ask when you know when the book is ready, actually the book is ready when the deadline is. So it's and for me the book is ready when I'm too exhausted. I can't do it anymore. It coincides. It was the same time when the deadline was, but it was really, I couldn't have done it anymore.
Right, thank you. Does anybody else want to come in? I think I've got a hand up here, so please do come in. I can't quite see who's got the hand up. That was a dead hand, as it were. Okay. Anybody else want to? Because I've got. Okay, perhaps I'll. Elina, do feel free to come back in the room as we make yourself visual again. That would be probably a very nice thing as we move towards the end. Kat's writing in the margin. I think your description universalizes research experience, taps into a more human urge to chase thought and connection and move away from the academic in that sense. That's not a question, but a comment on Sarah's comments. Okay, I'll perhaps ask her about the metaphor of the night, if I may, before we finish, perhaps, and insomnia maybe, because you might call the book, you know, the women I dream about at night, but no, it's when you think about at night. So it's perhaps, as you're saying, really something to do with insomnia, perhaps. And James Joyce famously says, you know, that's what he wants. The ideal reader is an insomniac, and the whole experience of insomnia is obviously a very interesting one. It's not necessarily Freud country, because it's not necessarily dreaming, it's maybe something else. Do you want to say anything about the nightness of your projects, or that project?
Well, the project really started from the fact that I was quite anxious and distressed and didn't know what I should do with my life. And I literally was lying awake at nights, waking up at 3 a.m. and panicking about what I should do. And I really started to think about these exemplary women at those times at night. So it was it's not fiction.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Elina, do you want to round things up or offer a final question before we finish? Over to you. You're in charge.
You're muted.
Yes, you're muted, Elina.
Yes, I was actually hoping for you to do that, so we'll get the honor to wrap this up.
Okay.
You've done this 1,000 times, so.
Okay, I'll do the wrapping
yeah.
thing. Okay. Well, thank you, Elina, and thank you, Mia.
Yes.
And thank you, Sara, as well. Beautiful reading, beautiful text, and thank you everybody for joining us, and the comments and the questions. I'm pleased to say this will be recorded and we'll get it up onto YouTube as soon as we can. So thank you very much, everybody. It was so many windows, doors, drawers being opened. So thank you very much. Thank you, and I'll see most people are non. Cheers. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Mia. Bye.